This might be a ridiculous question, but over the last 4 decades, have you ever had a nightmare about Freddy Krueger?
I did, and it came from part one.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Mr. Englund, it is always an honor to see you, sir. I always appreciate you taking the time. This is not something that's ever lost on me. It's always good to see you.
Well, thank you, Jake. I almost wore the exact same long sleeve tee. Thank goodness. I'm a little lighter.
We could have done
We
it.
got
We
to
could have.
call
We
each
could
other
have.
before we work. Yeah.
Always,
What are
always.
you
I'm
wearing,
always
Jake?
down.
Yeah.
You know what's so funny? I've actually spoken to you a few times from that room, and I just thought I'd start by asking, what is the coolest piece of Freddy memorabilia that's maybe within grabbing distance right now? Is there anything
So
nearby?
I can't really grab it. If you see the illuminated shelf over this
Yeah.
shoulder up high, that's many of the Freddy fans. In fact, I would say a vast majority of the Freddy fans have decided they need to get a little more time, a little more to do in their life. But they've decided that the makeup, the special effects makeup by Kevin Yeager for Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is the superior makeup. It's the favorite. In fact, it even has its own name. I think they call it the witchy makeup. And that's the original mold up there. Now, I made the mistake of putting the Spanish Nightmare on Elm Street Part 6 crew hat for the publicity tour on top of it. So it stuck to it because there's always some kind of colostomy bag glue on those things, left over from the crew. All those guys went on to work on, Walking Dead and everything else. They have Oscars for Chronicles of Narnia and Kevin's that did Chucky, of course. But that's probably the most valuable piece because that really is the original mold head that they designed off of from my first test for Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
That's so funny because I actually have a question written down, which is about my favorite Freddy look was always part two. And I don't know why. I don't know why I always thought that's when he looked best.
I think it's thinner. It's the first time people saw the makeup a little finer, and I don't mean better or superior. I just mean thinner
Mhm.
and detailed, and I could animate it more subtly. But even though it looks better, the closer you get, the David Miller makeup from part one looks better in a mid shot. If I'm back and you can, they're showing me from the knees up or from the hips up. That seemed the texture on that makeup seemed to catch the light better. But the closer they got to the Kevin Yeager design, the better it looks. Yeah.
Wow. Well, honestly, it's never looked bad. I want to start out with a big question. 40 years since you put on that glove for the first time. This might be a ridiculous question, but over the last 4 decades, have you ever had a nightmare about Freddy Krueger?
I did, and it came from part one. I had fallen asleep in the makeup and I had a little honey wagon then. I didn't have a star trailer. I had a little honey wagon and a little cot, and opposite the cot was a counter, the makeup shelf, a mirror, and around it were light bulbs, and they were all set on the dimmer switch very low. And I was trying to take a nap, and it was awkward because I was in the makeup and I rolled a towel up very tight, uh, like we used to do when we'd go to the local pool to swim. That really cool tight
Yeah.
towel,
Yeah.
and put it under my head so I wouldn't smear the makeup. And I heard boom, boom, boom on the door of the trailer. Mr. Englund, we're going to try to get this shot. And it was like the hour of the wolf. It was like 4 a.m. trying to get this shot before the sunrise. They had Heather out in her pajamas. It was cold. She's hiding behind a bush or something. And I sat up on my cot and I had that terrible, breath that you have in the morning when you wake up. And I wasn't completely awake yet. And I glanced into the mirror opposite me. And there, in the half light of the bulbs around the mirror, in forced perspective, equidistant from the mirror that I was this old burned man looking back at me. And for 1001, 1002, maybe 3 seconds only, my heart almost stopped. I was so disoriented, partly because of the nap, but also because I didn't know what I was looking at or where I was. And it was not my bedroom. It wasn't a familiar space to me. And that moment is seared. I can close my eyes right now, Jake, and see it. That's why I tell this story well, because I can see it in my mind's eye. And that it sneaks into my dreams maybe, I don't know, a couple times a year. It's just like some little filler. It's like that thing in the old, post office or behind a hotel, the cubby holes where you put the keys and throw the envelopes. Well, I always think of components for nightmares and dreams as being things stuck in there that you have to sort out. And that little moment comes back and does haunt me a couple times a year.
Oh, I love that. I've got to tell you, I rewatched the original as I do every year this time of year, but my girlfriend had never seen it. And it was so great to see the moment near the end where Nancy is trying to thinks maybe she defeated you and you pop up from the other side of the bed. She must have jumped 10 feet out of, and it's just kind of such a cool reminder that it's still got it. It's 41 years and it's still like she's jaded when it comes to this stuff, but it's still got it.
Well, I also think it's entered, I have 3 generations of fans now, and people watch it for all sorts of different reasons now. I mean, I think there's people that binge the movies at Halloween, and it's almost like it's the Halloween, It's a Wonderful Life. It's just something you do over Halloween. It's on in the background at a party, or it's on in the dorms at somewhere at a college, or it's on over the bar for on Halloween night somewhere. They just got it on. And so it's become part of the American fabric of culture, like a lot of stuff does. And I'm just, real happy, that this strange little low budget movie we all worked on, and then it became this franchise. And then after 40 some years, it's still work. And the new ultra high def thing is out now. The extraordinary.
I watched it in 4K.
Well, the 4K
looks good.
Freddy versus Jason and Wes Craven's New Nightmare and Stephen Hopkins Part 5 really held up in terms of their look. And 3 and 4, of course, 3 may be the fan favorite, and that's a good double bill. But now 3 and 4 look great, and you can see the Jacques Heitken camera work in those ones. When he's done it, and the guy that did Part 4, Roy Wagner, literally changed and upgraded the whole way we watch network television. He was the guy that gave the look to CSI. Remember when you first started watching CSI, just how great it looked compared to everything else on TV that was kind of bright and everybody was kind of orange,
of course,
that base. Yeah. We all had to wear that base. You've had to put that on, in a hurry sometimes. And we look like we've laid under a sun lamp too long, but, and that's Roy Wagner. And so part 4 looks great. It really looks great now, because that's Rennie Harlan and that whole junkyard sequence. Just, you can see the dust in the shafts of light and everything. It's really rich. So I'm only pimping it to everybody and pushing it because so many of the fans I've met the last 10, 12, 15 years saw it only on video. Now that's 7 movies over 10 years on video, but from 84 to 94, but still, they saw it on an old Sony TV, color TV, with a video that they checked out that probably wasn't rewind. Don't turn them in unless you rewind.
Yeah. Be kind, rewind always.
Yeah. And or that dog-eared copy passed around the dormitory, by your frat bros. And so it's so great to tell people that if they never encountered this movie on the big screen when it first came out, or they've never encountered it pristine on your man cave flat screen, it looks great. Because I just saw not Freddy versus Jason. I just saw Wes Craven's New Nightmare in 4K.
Masterpiece, by the way.
It looks phenomenal. Yeah, it looks great.
Speaking of when it first came out, sometimes people forget that the year Elm Street came out, the original Nightmare, that was the same year as quote unquote Friday the 13th, the final chapter. By the time we got Freddy, they were already trying to kill off Jason. I think we had seen Michael twice. Just as an actor, Do you know like what the attitude toward those types of movies and those types, like what was your attitude before Freddy came to be? Were you What was your attitude toward those types of
Well,
characters?
I had friends in those movies, you know, my sort of the girl that they were going to kind of play me off of in V had
Mhm.
continued as a series. Jennifer, lovely actress, and she quite successful in soap operas as well. But she's in one of the early Friday the 13th, and obviously Kevin, 6 Degrees of Separation, Bacon, you know, he's in one of the original ones. So I knew people that had worked on them, and then I met Sean Cunningham on the set of Nightmare One. He came in because we were running out of money at the very end and did some second unit help for Wes because they were buds. And so of course, I knew about that world, and I'd all as a child, and I'd kind of buried it under my theater snobism and my desire to do living playwrights and the avant-garde and classics, you know, only Shakespeare and Chekhov and Moliere and George Bernard Shaw for me. Give me some Ibsen or give me death. But I was sort of full of myself. You know, I was the guy in the turtleneck and the corduroy jacket with the patches on the sleeve. And I had forgot about little Robbie England, you know, who went to mowed lawns and went to Saturday matinees to see, you know, horror movies. I can remember saving up my allowance to go see Forbidden Planet, you know, and I can remember seeing, you know, that then later the Hammer films with the saturated color, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, who's in Star Wars, and those actors, Herbert Lom, and but I loved it. I had a godfather who was a huge distributor for Simon and Schuster, who had this amazing collection of books and pocketbook posters, poster art. And he had this coffee table book called The Movies. It's right up here behind me
Mm.
on the shelf. Yeah, and that vertical stack of books. It's down towards the bottom. But there's a two-page fold out in that, in the section on the golden age of horror. And it's of all the different makeups Lon Chaney did and
Wow.
Man of a Thousand Faces. Now I'm 8 years old. Robbie England at his godparents' house, sitting around in my Speedos with the little belt on them, you know, and my hair's turning green from the chlorine because I'm so blonde. And I'm looking at this book, and there's a picture of Lon Chaney in a movie called Zanzibar or something, and he's boiled an egg and taken the skin off the placentia off the egg and put it on his eye to make it milky and blind, the first contact lens, right? And he's doing that in the silent film times. Already he's playing with distorting his face, you know, like Brando in the Cotton Balls, and Lon Chaney with the making his nostrils big for Phantom of the Opera. But I just was completely obsessed with that stuff. And I forgot all of that. I literally remembered this, Jake, about 12 years ago. This was just out of my brain. And then something's tricked and I remembered all of that. I think it was actually I saw a still from Potemkin, and because there was also Potemkin was also in that same book, you know, silent films, Russian films, and I saw that same still from that book of that, and then I remembered going over to my godfather's house and sitting down in the bedroom and opening up that book and going right to the horror section. I think there was a picture of Frankenstein, a still of Karloff and the little girl by the lake, because that scene was excised from a lot of release.
Sure.
And I think also there was a picture in that book from Daughters of Dracula, and the daughters are there, and this is pre-Hays Code,
Mm.
no bras. You know, I mean, it was really kind of erotic. It was kind of
Sure.
an early little goth tingle, you know. I had a little goth tingle, you know, because it was before the Hays censorship code, and you know, you saw a little bit, you know, in the diaphanous gowns that the daughters of Dracula were wearing. So it was kind of, you know, as a child, it was something forbidden and taboo, you know, and it was horror. But all of those little early influences, I kind of buried them, you know, and it may have been because I'd become this kind of snobby stage actor for a while, and just, you know, thought that not that I thought it was beneath me. I just forgot about it. I just buried it, you know, in all my knowledge of Harold Pinter and Edward Albee and all the stuff that I thought was so special as a young adult.
It's a different kind of special, different
Yeah,
kind. But
yeah.
I maybe a simple question. Do you remember your very first take on the first movie? Do you remember the very first time Wes ever called action?
I think I do. I think I was on a catwalk,
Okay.
and I think I dragged the blades, and Wes liked it. And I think we found that very quickly. There was this great railing next to me, and I just put the blades on it because I knew it would make I think when I was climbing up to the catwalk, I heard that sound, and I just waited for Wes to say action, and then I did that, that scratch, and because you'd think, well, this will work. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard kind of thing.
If I were to ask you what your last take as Freddy was, would you tell me it's the Goldbergs or would you tell me it's Freddy versus Jason?
Oh no, I mean the last time I was sending it up a little bit, but yeah, my disappointment was, and I love it, and I love working with Wendy. I got to tell you, I did that show for my agent because his family loved it, but I also did that show because they were so nice to me, and because Adam sent me such a beautiful letter, but also just a chance to hang out with Wendy because she's really one of the funniest ladies in Hollywood. But no, I was supposed to get. I was they were bleeping through the whole show. It was a running gag. It was intentional bleeps. And we were setting ourselves up for at the very end, she's not afraid of me. And she goes, "Oh, oy vey, Mr. Knifey Hands. Oh, I'm so afraid, blah, blah, blah." And she runs away. And the camera's left on me, and I can't scare her. And I would turn to the camera and go, "Now that's some prime time," and they would bleep me. And because everybody would know what I'm saying, but that way it could be network, prime time, and we wouldn't have to say it, but we're getting all those values. We are on prime time. Robert Englund said the B word, but we bleep it because we've been bleeping everything else through the show. It's a joke, it's a running gag. And that's literally the last time I was Freddy, was that moment. Yeah.
Wow, that's a kind of a nice last take.
Yeah.
As
Except they didn't use it. Oh
I
no.
know, but it still counts. It still
Yeah,
was. It still was
counts.
your
Yeah.
last cut.
Yeah.
It's still. I've always wanted to ask you about your delivery of "This is God" because that beat that you wait between "this" and is just Do you remember coming up with that line delivery and also letting that beat sit for a moment?
I do, but I think, sometimes it's technical. I thought that they might come in for an insert shot. I think it might be me going this and then cut to the hand.
You're thinking like an editor.
Well, so you have to sometimes. You have to understand by the time I did Nightmare on Elm Street 1, I'd done over a dozen feature films and 30 hours of television series, let alone guest stars. So I knew you kind of start thinking that way about beats and dialogue and things like that.
I know for the most part, particularly on that first film, Wes let you take control of Freddy and let you sort of really kind of figure out who he was. But do you have a favorite piece of direction from him that all these years later you still remember?
The best thing about Wes was he left me alone on Nightmare. He was happy. He saw something, obviously, from the audition on that he knew I was going to bring. And Rennie left me alone too. And that's my favorite performance is Freddy Part 4, because I'm not in reality. And so I dance Freddy a bit in that. I don't mean literally dance, but I mean, I'm painting him into the surreal kind of frame. But Wes gave me some great stuff. I did a series for Wes in the 90s, and Wes finally became my friend, instead of my boss, instead of my Dr. Frankenstein.
Mm.
We were watching SNL together and we were drinking red wine. And my wife was there and Jack Coleman. And it was Dana Carvey doing the Head Wound Harry sketch. And Wes lost it. And, I've always said Wes kept the 14-year-old boy alive in him because when Wes was a child, he wasn't allowed to go to the movies. He wasn't allowed to read comic books. He had to go to church. I think he was allowed one Disney movie a year. So he was always playing catch up with the popular culture. And to see Wes laughing at SNL, at Dana Carvey doing Head Wound Hair, he almost fell off my couch, literally. You know, he kicked a wine glass over. He couldn't stop. His eyes were watering. And that was Wes letting me know that we were beyond this father-son, director-actor relationship. Now we were just friends. Because I mean, he had snot coming out of his nose. You know, he was laughing that hard.
I'm lucky enough to have done junkets long enough to where I had the pleasure to meet him one time, and I'm just so grateful to have had that moment. I'm a big believer. I'm a nerd in terms of how movies are made, and I'm a big believer in necessity is the mother of invention. There are so many moments in that first movie that are so incredible. And because they're before special effects, computer effects, they're even more impressive. I think of you appearing over Nancy's bed in the wall behind her, the death of Tina, obviously, Nancy in the bathtub, Johnny being sucked into the bed. I'd love to know from your perspective as a fan of filmmaking and movies, what is the best example of necessity is the mother of invention in regards to pulling off some of the effects in that first movie?
Well, Freddy over Heather in bed, that's just cheesecloth and me in makeup. That's all that is. And I think Jim Doyle might have done it too. He might have put on a Freddy mask and done it. We both did it. I don't know which one that they used. Yeah, you know, practical effects. You know, we had some problems. Both Johnny Depp's bedroom and Tina's bedroom, Amanda Wiss's bedroom, are the same. They just dress differently because we only built one.
I never knew that.
Yeah, they're the same room, but they're completely dressed differently and shot at different angles. But they both rotate. That's how they got the blood to come out of the bed. They use gravity. The bed's really upside down, and that's how that water all. They didn't have a propulsion thing beneath it, and so that's really interesting. Of course, they spun the room the wrong way with that scene the first time, and all the blood came out the window and onto the stage floor, and all the cables were snapping and popping, you know, all the electrical cables. I ran for the makeup room with Heather. You know, we were like just we were wusses.
Hollywood's so glamorous.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was scary. I knew better than to stay in there with all that water, and that was tricky. I think the pinnacle of practical special effects might be actually John Carpenter's The Thing. That's pretty extraordinary work in that. Yeah.
Yeah, unreal. And I love it. To me, it holds up. I watch it once a year. Anytime we have a blizzard in Chicago, that's my blizzard movie. Yeah. It's a great blizzard movie.
Dress like Kurt Russell.
What, you gotta have the big sombrero.
Oh, yeah,
you gotta have the giant sombrero. You know, for every Freddy sequel we got, I'm sure there were a lot of pitches and ideas that just never came to fruition over the years. I'm sort of curious, what was either the best or the worst Elm Street idea that never came to be? A sequel idea or a plot line, something that was big but just never happened?
Well, there's a great prequel sequence in the series, in the TV series, the pilot directed by Toby Hooper. I think there's probably a prequel script out there that I haven't seen that they should do or consider doing, and when they either doing it next when they reboot the franchise, or waiting, doing 3, 4, 5, maybe 3, 4, 5, and then go back and do it. Because standalone 2 could be standalone, especially in today's culture, and then they go back and do the prequel after you've done it all, unless they wanted to start with that. The best thing recently, I get lots of fan ideas, but somebody sent me a script. It wasn't a great script. It wasn't a bad script, but it had this sequence in it that was just mind-boggling to me that we had never included it. And it's Christmas season, and it's an alone camera in the walls of a convent that's obviously the last place you go when you're an old nun. And the camera winds around the corridors of this drafty cold convent, and it's the point of view of a nurse. And you walk to this room, and there in the corner is an old withered nun, and she's in a rocking chair, and she's knitting, a sweater for her son, and it's for Christmas, and it's in red and green stripes. You know, and now we know where the source of the sweater, you know. Yeah.
That has to happen.
Yeah. It's the night of 1,000 maniacs, you know. Yeah.
I always loved that.
Yeah. That had the child taken away.
You know, I don't know if this is a too heavy of a question. And if it's a weird, uncomfortable question, please let me know. But it was touched on in the Jackie Earle Haley movie. So in the first movie, was it ever discussed or decided if Freddy was a molester or just a killer?
No, see there, that's the bust right there. Just a killer.
I know that sounds.
This is God.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Here's the thing, Jake. There was a horrible scandal in Hollywood, in Los Angeles at the time, the McMartin nursery preschool scandal, and which has later been completely debunked. It was just one crazy mom, that was bipolar and taking too many pills, and she imagined the whole thing. And people, it's that exercise in hysteria, group hysteria. So Wes stayed as far away from ever wanting Freddy to be anything except a child killer. That's enough. Now, you have to think of the words child killer like you'd think of a song by The Doors or some punk group, or perhaps the name of a punk group. Tonight, the Child Killers at 10 o'clock are playing. It sounds like it's dark and poetic and symbolic. Freddy is a child killer in a suburban America on Elm Street, by the way, the street that our beloved President John F. Kennedy was assassinated on, and it's loss of innocence for the older children because they hear about the child killing, which is symbolic. It's the future. It's loss of innocence. It's all the stuff your parents. And if you notice in all the nightmare films, all the adults are very flawed. All the adults are very flawed. They're alcoholic. They're suffering from divorce and separation. They're single parents that aren't doing a good job, that aren't around. So there's a slight indictment there of a time in America, and this was, of course, the early '80s, when all of that stuff was coming to fruition, and we were starting to see the damage it was doing down the line. And Freddy is, of course, the symbolic. He is the bad news. It's coming. He is the loss of innocence. And that's why he haunts. He can only haunt people that are within the world of the people that did him wrong.
God, I love it. It really is that you use the right word. It is poetic in the right way. I'm sure you've been asked about this many a times, but I do always laugh at the opening scene of Scream, particularly just because it's Wes's film, with the killer saying that Nightmare on Elm Street is his favorite scary movie, but then Drew agreeing that while the first one was good, as she says, and I quote, the rest sucked. I'm sort of so curious. Did Wes let you know that joke was coming, that it was going to be in the first Scream? And I'd love to know what your first reaction was when you heard that.
Well, I was at a restaurant on Melrose in West Hollywood, and my old friend Drew Barrymore was there, and Wes and his producer were, trying to butter her up to be in the movie because, of course, she dies quick, like Janet Leigh in Psycho.
Exactly right.
It's a fake out. It's a fake out. So I knew Wes was up to all sorts of stuff with that film, but I also know Wes has a lot of fondness for part 3, and Wes's name is on that as a writer. And many of those writers of 3 and 4 and later, those guys have Oscars now, Brian Hegel and people like that. So there's some really important contributions there. We may have pushed the envelope too much in part 6, but we did it on purpose. That was sort of our Warner Brothers cartoon. We did it for
I love part 6.
Well, why we did it was we were sensing, just like they must have sensed with the superhero movies, we were sensing that we had gone a little too far with the glowy thing, as Bill Maher says. Everybody's on a quest for the glowy thing. I'm over the glowy thing. What do? They made movies like Deadpool and Guardians of the Galaxy. They had to. They had to say all those things the fans were thinking about the superhero movies just pushing the envelope too far. And so we intentionally did that with part 6 because Freddy was such a part of the culture then. I mean, he was being referred to on the Johnny Carson show at night and things like that. There were music videos with him. Rap stars like Will Smith and DJ Jazzy Jeff were singing about him. So we had to comment on that. We had to play with that. We had to acknowledge that. And then we could regroup and come back, and we brought Wes back And we did Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which is a smart, tight, wonderful movie made for the fans.
A masterpiece.
Yes.
You is correct me if I'm wrong. You used to babysit Drew Barrymore, is that right?
Well, I only a couple of times, yeah. But I somewhere in this room behind me, I have pictures of Drew posing, you know. But yeah, my girlfriend and I used to sometimes get stuck with babysitting her when her normal babysitter, which was her mother's best friend, had an audition. Because sometimes you get an audition at 2 in the afternoon, and she'd already volunteered to keep an eye on Drew, baby Drew, you know, and she would, you know, we'd get stuck with her for an hour while she drove over to her audition at Paramount.
So when you saw them at dinner, did you have any idea what that dinner was about, or just like, oh, Wes is talking to Drew and maybe they might be working
I
on a new
knew
movie kind of thing?
I knew Wes was doing a new movie, and I also knew a little bit about it, you know, jungle drums and all that. And I hadn't seen Drew in a while. You know, I'd seen Drew a couple of years before the screening, and she had just had her hair cut short, you know, bobbed short. You know, and I complimented her. I said, Drew, it looks great. You know, it's very, very French, you know, or something like that, you know. And we did the air kiss, and I said, I just turned I said, Drew, you got to do it. This guy's a gentleman, you know. He's a gentleman and a scholar, you know. But I was walking out. I was being wined and dined by some British producers, and that's where my head was really at. It was just almost like ships passing in the night. But yeah, I had a hunch that Wes was really, because I had, you know, I knew that he was into this sort of, what's the word here, this deconstruction concept, you know, with horror, deconstructing horror and reevaluating it and exploring it. And meta is the word that the critics use, you know. And it was sort of, Wes always was sort of doing that. I know, you know what we're doing, and I know that, and you know that we know that, you know, but we're still going to get you, you know.
That
Yeah.
works very well. I know I'm over time. I'm going to cut you loose on
Okay.
this, and then I just want to end on a positive question, because I've had the pleasure of talking with some of my favorite actors of all time, and a lot of times when I bring up that role or that moment that they're known for, I can feel them starting to hate me, and that I can feel the eyes rolling like, oh God, he's bringing up that character. And I've had the great pleasure of speaking with you many times, sir, and I've never felt anything but love for the character of Freddy. And I just would love to just set you up to talk about the fact that, like, it just doesn't ever, and obviously I'm sure at some point it has gotten old, but it doesn't seem like you've ever grown tired of us asking you these questions and asking you the same stories over and over again. I just don't understand how
Well, you
great you've
can't
been.
lie. Yeah, I can't lie. And so when people ask me how long the makeup takes, I have to tell them the truth. But what happens is I find these avenues of digression, and then you find something new. And that's always fun, especially with a good interviewer, you know. No, you know, with me, I'm, and this is the real reason I was able to make peace and embrace, you know, doing this horror franchise. I had done a dozen movies and a hit television show. I was already established
Mhm.
in Hollywood, and the television show had also been an international hit. So I was okay. In other words, I could, and I don't think I really made the decision to stick with it until part three.
Mhm.
Sometime between part two and three, I said, I realized how big it was getting. And I said, I'm going to go along for this ride. You know, I can see how I can use this, and I can see how I can work abroad, and I can see myself aging into, you know, horror films much better than and then trying to be the young guy, you know, on Dukes of Hazzard anymore. You know, this is better for me. And it's surprising and it's different. You know, I don't know what, you know, you have to understand when I was in the theater, I almost exclusively did comedy. You know, probably 85% of my work, 80% of my work was comedy professionally. Not that I didn't have some dramatic successes, but I got to Hollywood and I've done some comedy, but they weren't seeing me that way from the get-go. So I had to kind of see how they saw me and also where I was going. You kind of have to do that. You have to be honest with that. They see me this other way, and that's how I made peace with it really quickly. And when you make peace with it, then it becomes fun because then I mean I still see really cool artwork of me or just a really great retro designed movie poster with me on it, or somebody will bring me something from Europe that I've never seen before, and that's ego. It's like, wow, that's so cool. I wish I had room on my walls to hang it. But still, that's that person I permitted to stay alive in me, like Wes kept the 14-year-old boy alive in him. By keeping that fanboy alive in me, I'm able to kind of enjoy all this attendant merchandising and everything else that comes with being a kind of a horror icon, for lack of a better term.
Well, I've shown you in the past. I have the glove that you gave me whenever I got to sit with you here in Chicago when you underwent makeup to save the local movie theater, and I the glove has remained on my wall. I've got it. It's in a nice red and green striped shadow box with a picture of us on either side. And my girlfriend, literally the other day, was like, "So this is going everywhere, right?" And I went, yes,
Yep.
yes, it is. Yes, it is. And something I've never actually shown you during the pandemic. I was looking for any story I could possibly do and started putting together a special here for my station in Chicago, where I was able to speak with you and with Kane Hodder and the late great Tony Todd, and just kind of did a piece that was a love letter to the movies I grew up in. And I've never gotten to show you, but I actually won one of these just because of you. Because of you, I have one of these. So I've got 10,000 more questions, but I am way over my time. I just want to end as I always do, as everyone does, and just say thank you for what you've done for us, for what you've given us. You've dedicated your life to making strangers happy, and we love you for it, and we love your talent and everything that you've given us. And it's not the fact that I've gotten to talk with you as many times as I have just blows my mind. It's not something I take lightly, sir.
Well, I just recently got to hang out in Chicago with a Chicago actor, Stephen McCaffrey.
Yes.
And Stephen Caffrey and Amanda Tina from the movies. They got married last year, and it was the single best time in my life in Chicago. I think Nancy went on the White City serial killer Chicago Fair tour, and I had to work, but then I got to go out and we ate our way across Chicago and had and I've been to Chicago a million times, and it was the single best time in my life, being with a local and a fellow actor, Stephen, and doing it his way, and we caught the great summer crew for Second City, just going for it. Absolutely power comedy. They were so great, and eating great seafood. Oh my God. And it's a great town you're part of, and I envy you.
Well, we love you for it. If you can't tell, it's right there behind me. The sun's going down. The river's right below me. I'm guessing the Devil in the White City tour would have been somewhere that direction. But I love you guys. Please let me know next time you're in town, because dinner would be on me. It'd be my honor.
We'll do it. Thank you.
All right.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.